Welcome to this eLearnSecurity video training lesson on null sessions. In this lesson, we will learn how to gain access and information from systems where shares are not secure against null session. Null sessions allow anonymous connection to a network share on Windows-based systems. This means that an attacker may be able to get read and write access to the victim machine without knowing any username or password on the system itself. Note that this connection cannot be established to any typical share, but only against inter-process communication, also known as IPC, which allow Windows processes to communicate with other processes on the network. To begin our tests, let's start a console and use a SYN scan with Nmap on the specific port used for Windows printer and file sharing. These ports are 135, 139, and 445. Within the results, we can see a host has all three of these ports open. We will use this machine as the target machine, so let's remember its IP address. The first tool we're going to use is enum for Linux, which allow to enumerate shares with null sessions. Since we're using a Kali Linux box, we already have this tool installed, so we just need to type the command on our terminal. Command enum for Linux. We can see the command syntax by typing the name of the tool and hitting enter. We can see here the options available to use with a tool that are very similar to the enum plus for Windows. However, note that there are certain options such as -L, N, D, and F which are not used in the Linux version. We will start with A-N flag, which is similar to the nbtstat command for Windows. In the results, we see the 20 flag, which means that the file server service is open, meaning that the user has open shares. In order to test this against null session, we will move forward and use the -P option and try to enumerate the password policy on the remote system. We can see that enum successfully gets some information and gives us the password policies of the system. Now, if we want to use this information on a brute force tool, we know the parameter we can use. As you can see, the remote system is not using a password complexity file or a password complexity policy, and that the reset account lockout duration is 30 minutes and that the locked account duration is 30 minutes. Now we will use the -S option to enumerate the shares available on the remote machine. As you can see, within the results there are many share names available, such as backups $$ default share, sales, and so on. You can also see that according to the results, the victim machine is sharing the C drive itself. If for some reason you don't get enough information from enum, it has the ability to use a brute force file to try to enumerate any share available on the remote machine. This name generally contains some username and password combinations. We use this by using the -S command with the path to the brute force list, which is /usr/share /enum for Linux /share-list.txt. Once we have the results, we can see that almost all of the same shares are enumerated, as happened with the -S command. Enum also has the ability to run all the available commands in a single prompt using the -A option. As we run this, we can see in the results that all the information we can get with the options available are in the tool. It simply emulates the same command we just completed. For example, we can see NBT stat information that we have retrieved before, with the -n option. We can see some information about the users available on the remote machine. Here instead, we have a list of shares, the same as we got with the -S command, and then the password policies, the groups, and much more information. Now that we have a good idea as to the kind of information we can get from enum, let's switch to our second tool today, which is by Impacket, and it is named smardump. In Kali Linux, you can find it in the following path: /usr/share/python-impacket -doc/examples/samrdump.py. By navigating the Impacket example directory, we can run ./samrdump.py to see the basic syntax example that can be used with the tool. Since we do not have a username or password, we will simply supply the IP address of our victim machine to see what kind of results samrdump can give us. As you can see, samrdump gives us some information from the SAM account, such as the username and the UID of that specific account on the victim machine, the last logon date, some information about the passwords, and so on. We can see our guy guest, the administrator, and a few more with a valid user ID on the remote machine. We can further exploit this information with our brute force tool by knowing the password complexity as well as the user ID. So we will have a much better chance to exploit the remote system. Although we have found a lot of information with the previous two tools, we can also use one of the most popular network scanners to perform some checks on null session. The tool we are talking about is Nmap. Even if it is mainly used for network discovery, port scanning, and so on, Nmap offers some very interesting features that allow the user to run scripts. These scripts can be used to check if a remote system is vulnerable to specific vulnerabilities, such as null session, and then get information from the remote system. We already know that the target machine is vulnerable to null session, so we can try to use Nmap scripts to see what information we can get. To do this, let's run the following command: nmap -script equals smb -enum -shares, followed by the target IP address. As we can see from the results, we have anonymous access to the IPC share. In other words, the system is vulnerable to null sessions. Let's now try to use another Nmap script. Let's use the same command as before, but this time we will use the script enum-users. Once again, we are able to retrieve information from the remote system. Here indeed, we can see all the users available, their ID, and some password information. Now that we know all of the users, another very great script that we can run is smb-brute. This script will try to brute force the remote system username and password. So let's run it and see what happens. Awesome. After just a few seconds, the script was able to retrieve the clear text password of two users, ELS and guest. Knowing these credentials opens the system to a variety of further attacks, but this is out of the scope of this video training lesson. So this concludes our training on null session. Thanks very much for joining us.